for your life. I'm your host, Patty, and I'm glad you joined me today because we're going to be making an easy, simple, nutritious, and delicious recipe with 4 ingredients that I'm sure is going to be a family favorite. But before we get to that, I want to talk about a concept that we don't often think about when we're talking about clean, healthy, nutritious eating. And that's the concept of eating locally and seasonally. So let's talk a little bit about that. When we're eating locally, what that means is that we're getting the most nutritious food we can on our table. It hasn't been picked halfway around the world 6 months ago and then sat in a storage facility and spent weeks on a truck making it to our local grocery store. By the time we get that food to our table, it's devoid of nutrients. So if we're buying from local farmers, we're getting the most nutritious food we can. The other thing is that we're getting seasonal food, and that's important because seasonal food keeps us in tune with Mother Nature and gives our bodies the type of fuel we need for the weather and the environment. So for example, in the summertime, the fruits and vegetables that are most available to us and that are seasonal and local are the high water fruits and vegetables. They're juicy, they're heavy in water. That helps hydrate us in the warmer weather, and it helps to cool us as well. We also tend to eat more raw foods in the summer months when it's warm. That's because we want a lighter kind of food for our body. We don't need the heavy, rich, dense food that our body might need in the winter. But as the weather starts to change and the temperature starts to drop, the body's looking for something a little bit more to fuel us in the colder weather. We need something richer, more dense. We need those complex carbohydrates to keep us warm, because those will actually fuel the body to help us heat and stay at an even temperature. So our body's looking for foods like those whole grains, those complex carbohydrates, things that have been simmered on the stovetop for hours or cooked in the oven for long periods. And that's the kind of food that is going to serve us best through the winter. So the other idea around eating locally and seasonally is about our body and the exposure to the same nutritional biochemistry day after day. So if we're eating locally and seasonally, it helps us add rotation to our diet, and this is critical because when we eat the same food day after day, week after week, year after year, we can actually stress the body's immune system to the point where we can develop sensitivities or even allergies to certain foods. Typically, this happens with protein molecules, so things that are like animal-based or eggs, your meats, things like that. It doesn't typically happen with our fruits and vegetables, but a couple of years ago, I became highly sensitive to blueberries after repeated exposures to that. So it can happen with any type of food. So that's why it's important to eat rotationally and with a lot of variety. So eating in tune with Mother Nature, eating local foods, eating seasonally, and ensuring rotation is a good thing, and your body will appreciate it. So that brings me to today's recipe. As you can see, we're going to be working with squashes. And nothing says fall to me like seeing these hard winter squashes on your grocery shelves. So these are so versatile. They can be the star ingredient in your meal, or they can be the humble side dish. You can bake them, roast them, steam them, put them in soups. These make a delicious base for any kind of soup. Cut up a squash. For interest's sake, you could throw in an apple or a pear or some carrots and cook that in the liquid of your choice, whether it's coconut milk or chicken broth, and you've got a delicious pureed soup that will keep you warm on those cold winter days. So today we're going to be cooking with a spaghetti squash. And this is really unique. If you've never seen them, when it cooks, it actually turns into what looks like spaghetti strands. Really, really yummy. You could even use this in place of spaghetti, but today we are going to use this in a recipe with 3 other ingredients: chicken, pears, and a sheep cheese called Pecorino Romano. It's delicious and easy. Let's get started. So all I've done here is just cut this spaghetti squash in two. Every squash, when you cut it open, is going to be full of seeds, but you don't want those. You can just discard them. Sometimes if the squash is big, it is somewhat challenging to cut open. You may need some help with that. So I've got my two squash halves. All I'm going to do is place them face down on a cooking sheet. Now I've got it lined with some parchment paper. That's strictly optional. It's going to go into the oven at 375, and depending on the size of the squash, it could take anywhere from 35 to 45 minutes. You need it well done in order for those spaghetti strands to come apart easily. So we'll get this in the oven. So while my spaghetti squash is cooking in the oven, I'm going to prepare the rest of the ingredients. And as I said, it's 4 ingredients today. So what I've done is I've cut up 2 Bosc pears, just into slices, thin slices. They're just sitting in some cold water with lemon juice so they don't turn brown. I've taken 2 organic chicken breasts and I've just cut them up into smaller pieces just so that it cooks evenly and more quickly. And I've got my Pecorino Romano, which is a sheep cheese. It's quite aged and very salty and adds a delicious, delicious component to the sweetness of the pears. Wonderful. So I'm just waiting now for the spaghetti squash to finish cooking, and then we can bring it all together. So I just brought my spaghetti squash out of the oven. It was in there for about 45 minutes at 375, so it's nice and steaming hot. And all I want to do now is dish out all of that delicious meat of the squash. So you probably can't see the individual strands here, but as I just start to scoop this out, it just falls apart into like little individual spaghetti strands. It's just unbelievable how that works, but it's delicious and beautiful. So I'm going to get this out of the shells and we're moving on. So I'm just browning the chicken in the pan, so with a little bit of coconut oil. You know we always want to use coconut oil when we're cooking at higher heats because it stays stable. Now that the chicken's browned, I'm going to throw in these pears. I want those to cook up a little bit too. Now I've got quite a few pears, so I don't know if I'm going to use them all. And a few more. There we go. Beautiful. So we just want the pears to cook up just a little bit so they're a little bit softer. Right? We want them to be nice and tender. You know, one of the other nice things about eating locally and seasonally is that it helps to reduce our carbon footprint. And that's a good thing. You know, you're eating and feeding your family nutritious food, but it's also good for the planet. So those pears have been simmering for about 3 to 4 minutes. And now I'm just going to throw in my wonderful, delicious spaghetti squash. Just going to spread that all around. Now I seasoned that chicken liberally with salt and pepper and a little bit of garlic. And that's it. Now, the final piece de resistance to this recipe is a little bit of sage. So we're going to add about 1 to 1.5 teaspoons of dried sage. And the combination of the sage with the chicken and the pear is just delicious. Delicious. So simple. You can see how that came together very quickly. 4 ingredients. And now all I'm going to do is just mix it together, make sure the flavors are distributed evenly. The inspiration for this recipe came from the Clean Eating magazine. I've mentioned that before, and it's just an excellent resource. So if you're looking for good recipes that you can trust, your go-to recipes, Clean Eating magazine is once again a wonderful resource. Alright, so we're just going to let that simmer all together for a few more minutes. And the final piece is that Pecorino Romano. Now I shaved it off in big chunks with just a vegetable peeler. You can grate it, whatever you want. But the sharpness and the saltiness of this cheese against the sweetness of the pears and the savory sage chicken, oh my goodness. That is just delicious. And you know what? Really, aside from the prep of cooking those spaghetti squash for that 35 minutes, this dish comes together, once the squash is cooked, in under 15 minutes. All right, and we're ready to eat. So as you could see, this came together really quickly. Just aside from the prep of that spaghetti squash and baking that, that's the biggest time consumer in this recipe. Everything else is quick and easy. And I know that this could be a family favorite. And we've got the warm, nourishing, hard winter squash, the fuel that our body wants in these colder temperatures. We've got the organic chicken, a little bit of the tanginess of that cheese, and I've also got some finely grated pecorino romano, sheep cheese. I'm just going to sprinkle that on the top, just for a little added zing. All right, and now comes the fun part. I'm going to get a little bit of chicken, a little bit of cheese, a little bit of that spaghetti squash in there. It would be hard to find a more satisfying meal. That's just so good. It's perfect in every way, and it's simple, and it's easy, and it's nutritious. I couldn't be happier. I can't wait to dig in. So thank you again for joining me. And remember, it's important to cook for your life because your life depends on it.